Good morning, and welcome to Personalization at Scale. You might be thinking, personalization, it's not new, it's not terribly innovative, we've been doing it for a while, but it's not this anymore. It's not using my first name in an email, it's not knowing it, it's not using it. We have to move beyond using first name as personalization. We're talking about it because if you do it right and you do it well, it works. It works to the tune of 26% higher open rates, 6 times higher transaction rates, 14% improvement in click-through rates. And these numbers vary from source to source and across industries and across programs, but I think what's more impactful than what we stand to gain is what we stand to lose. And that is, according to Accenture, $756 billion. This is the cost of poor personalization and lack of trust. And I think that lack of trust comes from our subscribers and our customers feeling like we don't know them, we don't know what they want, we don't understand their needs, and we build that trust through content. I think we've all heard this, and we all agree that content is king. But it's not just content, it's relevant content. It's personalized content. It's content that we have to get right. It is the right message to the right person at the right time. I think we've all heard that. And more recently, in the right channel and on the right device. And delivering this means we need data. And as marketers, we have become obsessed with data. We hoard it. We want more of it. We collect it at time of opt-in. We collect it via preference centers. We watch people's behavior in the inbox. We watch them on the web. We have machine learning. We have AI, right? We have all of these tools. And then what? What are we actually doing with that data? How do we do anything with that data in a meaningful way? And how do we do it in a meaningful way that isn't kind of Big Brother creepy, right? And I think this is a little bit of a double-edged sword. So as a consumer, if I go and I search for yoga mats, I expect to be retargeted with ads for yoga mats. As a marketer, though, it is that expectation piece that's really hard. Our subscribers know that we're watching, and they expect us to use that data to deliver highly tailored communications. So doing that requires both form and function, and it's a really delicate balance. Form in the way of organizing and defining our data, and function in the way that we visually bring that data to life in the inbox. And that is what we are here to talk about today. I'm Andrea Short. I'm a senior strategist here at Brightwave, and I kind of have the lucky position of getting to think about how all of this functions in a perfect world. In an ideal state, how do we do personalization at scale? Luckily, I am grounded by people who actually have to do this every day, so they'll bring that perspective of how we actually get it done.
Awesome. Hey everyone, I'm Katie Nice. I lead the CRM team for Zillow Group's New York City brands, Street Easy, Naked Apartments, and Out East. Like our national brand, Zillow and Trulia, we aggregate for sale and for rent listings and all the data associated with them to help users find their next home to buy or rent. But as a hyper-local brand, and it's only in New York City, we have the added challenge of incorporating all the nuances and unique data that comes along with New York City real estate into our marketing. So excited to dive into that today.
And I'm Amanda Ellwanger from United Healthcare. I've been at the company for a little over 8 years, but for the last 3 years, I've worked on the federal Medicare and retirement team. So our audience, think ages 65 plus. I lead our digital email team, both from a member and an acquisition standpoint. But for today's session, I'm really going to focus more on the acquisition point of view. But at our company, both member and acquisition, there are a lot of the same similarities. A couple nuances, but for the most part, it's relatively the same.
And hey guys, I'm Emily Randall. I work with Chick-fil-A. And I've been with Chick-fil-A for about 4 years now, and I lead the communications with our known customers. So a huge piece of that is our email program. I've worked in email for about 2 years, and I would consider myself a success story when it comes to email, only because I worked, my previous positions were more in social media and all things digital, but really focused on social. And I remember thinking, I would never work in email. That doesn't seem fun. And David talked about, before this, he talked about all the news that was, email is dying. And I think that was my point of view. And so about 2 years ago, I did take on email, and it has been an awesome journey, but it's really incredible how much we can measure and prove for the business.
So our goal today is really to give you a roadmap, a step-by-step process to achieving personalization at scale. And we've split it up into that form and function, or data and design, and talking about how those are both critical pieces of doing this and doing it right. So the first thing we have to do is define it. Define what? This is all about data. What do you have? What do you want? How are you going to get it, and how are you going to use it? So we'll dive right in. Number one is, what do you have? And I think on its face, this seems pretty straightforward and simple. You just write down all the attributes that you have, but it is much more complicated than that.
Yeah, definitely. So for us at StreetEasy, we've definitely encountered every single one of these obstacles. Data living in multiple databases, fields having the same names, but no one knows which one actually is the person's real name, things like that. So to help us kind of overcome those obstacles, I think it's really due to a close partnership with the data, or be it BI team, analytics team, just because they'll be the main partners you'll probably need to uncover which is the source of truth, where does it live, and then how best to kind of align on goals to get the data into a place where you can actually use it in your marketing. So I think the partnership is key. And then for us, for the last one, the impossible to access piece, it also really helped by exposing the data to us in a marketer-friendly tool like Looker we use, for example. And that's really helped us give the marketing team some runway on their own without always needing to go to the data team too. So I'd highly recommend something like that.
So for us, we're lucky enough that we do have a source of truth, but that doesn't mean we don't have many, probably hundreds of different systems utilized throughout the organization. But what it does mean is that all of those systems essentially have to feed into our source of truth. The obstacle that we really run into is really around standardization. A disposition for us in one system could mean something totally different in another system, although they are completely the same. So as Katie mentioned, it really is around the partnerships of partnering with the right people, the right teams, to really understand what that data is, to prioritize it, and then continue to build your email program.
Yep, and then for Chick-fil-A, I think it's helpful to know some of the history. About 3 years ago, we had a number of different email programs across the business and multiple different teams working on them. And so we had an email insiders database that was our general newsletter about the company. We had Cow Calendar, which you could sign up for and get monthly emails about the new offer that month. We had A-List, which was a local loyalty program. And then we rolled out Chick-fil-A One in the summer of 2016. And with that came a whole slew of emails, transactional emails, email verification. So like I said, there were a lot of different teams working on these. From a look and feel standpoint, all the emails looked different, different databases. So we went through a really fun exercise of understanding all of those different databases and what the overlap looked like. We ended up making the decision to center all of our emails around Chick-fil-A One, because that was going to then become our source of truth. So we did have to make a tough decision to let some other people go that were previously in email programs, and so did kind of a series to get as many people to convert over to Chick-fil-A One as possible. And then like what these ladies said, I think the partnership across the business with IT, our analytics group especially, was extremely important. And so that did a lot for, I think, our program, how it stands today, just because we've grown really strong relationships with various teams across the business in order to get this done. So now there is a single source of truth.
And I think what's important here, too, is that it's not just cataloging the attributes that you have, it's giving them context. So this data dictionary that comes as an output of this step should really tell you, what is this field, what's the definition, how do we use it, what % is populated, how is it updated, when is it updated, and you're going to need that cross-functional partnership to get all of that information. That's not something that you can do in a silo. So figure out what you've got, that's step one. Next is, what do you want to know? And this one actually is pretty straightforward. It's, well, we want everything, like everything. Just give me all the data. And that's okay. I think in this step, you bring back all of the partners that you brought in the room the first time, because they all have a very different perspective, and they all want data for very different reasons. And that's okay. This is throw everything at the wall, and nothing at this point needs to stick. And I think the perspective there too is, I want purchase history, and someone else says, well, I want purchase frequency. Well, I want to know how recently they purchased, or the category that they purchased, or the amount that they purchased. So having all those voices helps you to broaden how you're looking at your data, and then in the next step, we start to really whittle that down. So this really is just your attribute wish list. Then you have to figure out what you're going to do with it. This is where you get to look at people and tell them no, if they don't have a reason for the data. But it's hard, because they're going to say, but I want it.
Yeah, so this is where Marketing 101 really comes into play, is starting with what are our business objectives. I think it's really easy to get distracted with a lot of different data points. The minute that you start throwing all the data points against the wall to say, what do we want, it can get pretty distracting. So starting with the business objectives of what are we trying to do, what is it that we want customers to be doing, helps align a lot of different teams. And then also layering that with, well, what's the level of effort to even capture this attribute or take action on it is a huge piece of it. There might be certain attributes that we want or data points that we want that might be a really heavy lift for the team. So I think balancing, hey, what do we want? But then also there might be some low-hanging fruit that you might just be able to do right away. And so we centered our email program. We started with doing some action-based, hey, did somebody mobile order? Did they just join? So looking at certain points in their journey to start to personalize around.
I think that prioritization, you don't have to say no to anything that's not a need. You just need to categorize it as a nice to have and not a need to have, and that will really help in determining the collection method we're going to talk about next. So really, you take that list of attributes, you assign a purpose. If there is no purpose, you don't know how you're going to use it, then you shouldn't collect it. And that goes back to setting those expectations with your subscribers. Because if you're asking for a piece of data and then you're not turning around and using it, you're going to lose their trust, and then you're going to lose them as a customer. The next step then is figuring out how you're going to get that data. And this is why assigning that prioritization is so important. If it is something that is mission critical for your program, you cannot deliver a personalized experience without this one attribute, then maybe you should directly ask at time of opt-in. Then you have to balance, are we asking too much at time of opt-in? So there's a lot of options, I think, for how you get the data. There is time of opt-ins, like we talked about earlier. There's preference centers. You can do it by watching people's behavior in the inbox or on the web. You can invest in machine learning or AI, and you have to really figure out what works best.
Yeah, so for us, the collection method not only depends on the priority, but really also the channel. So if you guys remember earlier, I said that our target audience is 65 plus, so not the most digitally savvy all the time. So for us, we have a telesales team, and they actually account for 70% of our email address opt-ins as well as other data attributes. Although when people call into telesales, they're a little bit lower down in the funnel, so they're more willing to give all of the information you could probably imagine. Their birth date, which prescription drugs they're taking, who their primary care provider is, you name it. They like to talk on the phone, so they'll give you every answer under the sun. Those that are higher up in the funnel and a little bit more digitally savvy, those baby boomers entering the market, they are not willing at this time really to give as much information. So when we talk about collecting data through our website, we really ask for just email address. We started with first name, last name, and then we really just scaled it back because that's really what we're ultimately after. Give us your email, we'll give you a free guide, and then really start doing that progressive profiling from there. So it's not always just about asking for email address in telesales, just because we can get more from that channel versus a digital channel.
And for us, what you'll see, or hopefully we're reading through when someone comes to our site, all you have to enter is your email address, but then you're faced with this form of over 80 plus preferences of what you can select for what you want in your next apartment, ranging from price to bedrooms to then fields like it needs to be pet friendly, or I want to be close to this subway line, and some very specific filters like that. So some people maybe only fill out the top field, just what price range do you want, where others are filling out up to every single one of these fields, all to say regardless of how many they fill out, we want to make sure we're delivering them a hyper active alerts to make sure anytime a new listing comes to a market that matches this very specific criteria, we're letting them know. So for us, it's that kind of balancing that they're faced with this big form, but then making sure we kind of learn throughout too then what they click on once they get these alerts, especially if they didn't select very many options. Maybe we can help them refine their search, or maybe you should look at this neighborhood too. So kind of using that information based on what we got at time of entry to kind of help them throughout their search. Though the added challenge we have here is if you're looking for a rental in New York City, it's a really short timeline. Most people are renting maybe in just 2 weeks is kind of the average life cycle. So working with that time frame, we only have that short of a time period to gather all of the information we want about them, and then they kind of become dormant for 10 months, up to 10 months. So using that to inform our marketing throughout that time is really important. And then as Andrea mentioned, back to the email preference center too, we are also in the lucky position that most people don't turn off these alerts even after they find an apartment. They kind of want that what if, or maybe like, what did I miss, or hopefully I found the best apartment. So they'll keep receiving these and then re-engage when they're looking for a new place again.
And I think that's an important point too, is when you collect it. So if it's something that's super critical, maybe you do put it on the opt-in form, or you ask it via progressive profiling in the welcome series. When you have that peak inflection period, you know they're super engaged, you know they're gonna open this email, so you ask right away. Where some of the ones that were deprioritized, you progressively profile those over time. You don't need to know them now. I think this is actually a great example. It's the low barrier to entry. They fill out what they want. If there are pieces that you felt were really critical, you can start asking those in these alerts. Like, want a more tailored alert, also tell us what kind of flooring you like, or if you wanna be on a high floor or low floor, whatever the case may be, so.
Perfect.
So that's it. Now you know what you have, you know what you want, you know how you're gonna get it, and you know how you're gonna use it. Now what do? Now you have to actually go turn this into this highly personalized one-to-one email program. That's not easy. You start thinking through, oh my gosh, we have all these versions we're gonna have to create, and some person is going to have to create all of those versions, and how do we figure out how granular we're gonna get, and then compliance and approval. How in the world are we going to QA this thing? And I know for the healthcare industry, there's also regulatory compliance, and having to file this massive number of versions of an email is no small lift for your team. And I think it's important to note here too that personalization isn't just a dynamic module in an email. It's also having an email to meet every behavior. So if you think about the customer journey, if someone downloads a guide on your website, you have an email response to that. If someone calls telesales, you have an email response to that. So making sure that you have that communication that aligns with their behavior. And this progresses over time. And I think you can speak to how Chick-fil-A got to where they are today.
Yeah, this is our kind of the evolution of our logic matrix. This is our North Star that we build our emails around. So the first one that popped up was much more basic than what you see in the front, the front version. We do have a lot of different versions, and it's built over time. I think one of the key things that has helped with this is a good process around how we're actually getting all of this put together. So we've gotten to a point now where everybody kind of knows what their role is. So this looks really overwhelming, but it actually has been a really great, it kind of comes back to the partnership. Like Brightwave uses this to understand, hey, how am I coding this email? What's the specific audience? What's the KPI? So they're using it to code. Our IT team is using it to understand, well, what's the specific audience that this content block is going to go to? So we've added more and more over time. We're still really action-based, kind of going back to the progressive profiling and asking for more information. We haven't even gotten there yet. So there's a lot of information that we have available based on if you've mobile ordered, or if you've scanned, or if you've catered, that we're acting on as of today.
What I think is really smart about doing it this way too is it forces you to lay out the content and how you're going to differentiate that content across the versions, and it's sort of your gut check of, you know what, those two are really similar. Maybe we don't need 7 versions, maybe we only need 4 because the messaging is so similar. So it kind of keeps you in line too.
And make sure that everything has a purpose.
Right. So those are the 5 steps on the data side of the house. Figure out what you have, figure out where your gaps are, what you want, how are you going to get them, what purpose do they serve, and then kind of defining that logic or figuring out your process for how you're going to start to define that logic. The next thing we have to do is bring it to life. And this is kind of what it used to be. You get an email, and it has your first name in it, and that's cool. And now it can be this really ever-evolving, completely different experience. This is one email, but the 4 of us on stage would see a completely different variation of what this email looks like, which I think is really powerful. That is personalization. So the first thing you have to do on the design side is design for every use case. And that's complicated, thinking about, do we have to have a different design for every piece of content? How are we going to maintain consistency across those campaign types and those content types and the different groups that are going to use these emails, and making sure that we have an answer to each of those questions. So that really, it's a design system. It's thinking through every visual piece that needs to be represented in the inbox and making sure you've accounted for all of them. Do we need to have an educational blog piece of content? Do we have a promotion? Is it a product promotion or a white paper or a download guide? And then all your CTAs. This is really bringing your brand guidelines to life specific to emails. This is really the container that's going to hold your personalized experience. Go ahead.
Yeah, so for Chick-fil-A, we have, like what you're looking at right now is basically one piece of content, one content block in one of our emails, and then all the different variations that we build around it. But you can see that there's a similar look and feel, similar type of image, but the copy is a little bit different based on where the person is in their life cycle of Chick-fil-A One. So for us, when we did go through all of the different design, basically like simplification of all of our email programs, it was actually really nice timing for Chick-fil-A because we were going through a whole brand guidelines refresh anyway. So our team was already, the brand team was already working on that. So we kind of got email in to be able to have a focus on that as well. So.
I think another important piece here, too, when you're thinking about how this design comes to life, is ensuring that consistency, but doing it in a way that's very flexible, knowing that this is going to change constantly. As you learn more, you know more, you're going to do more. And so this gives you that framework to be able to do that and be able to evolve your program in a way that it gives you that consistency and that flexibility. So no matter what action someone takes, no matter what email comes on the other side of it, they're going to know that it's from you, and they know what the purpose of it is, and they know what you want them to do. So the next step then is make it easy to use. No big deal, just have all these different design elements and put them out there and create a pretty email. Again, so many versions, but I think the other thing here is who is using this template? What is their use case? Who owns it? What messages do they need to send? To what audience? Does that change how we approach it? And here you really need a playbook. This is bringing your brand guidelines into the email space and making it very email specific, which means that we have to take ownership here of saying how these things come to life. And if it's another group that's sending the email, we tell them how they're going to do that. This is what gives us that consistency and that flexibility that we need. So this is giving the rules to each of those tiles. So we showed you the different tiles, and maybe you have a video or maybe you have an article. When do you use which one? How do you use which one? How many characters should be in a headline? When do I use a green button versus a black button? All of that is going to be outlined in this playbook. It's incredibly detailed, but very important.
Yeah, so going back to the brand guidelines, again, it was great timing for us, but it forced us to look at how is email consistent with other channels? So we kind of took a bit of the lead when it came to, hey, is this consistent with .com? Is this consistent with the app of how it looks? Because we are linking to multiple other owned platforms within our emails. So we want to make sure that it was consistent. So it kind of forced the conversation of, well, how does that look in all of these other channels? But it has been extremely helpful so that it turns into a little bit more of a plug and play for us, so that we don't have to ask those questions of, hey, does this headline look like the right size? And every time that we're reviewing, we know what the standards are now.
And I think for probably both UHC and Zillow, knowing that people might go to StreetEasy, or they're going to Trulia, or they're going to Zillow, or they're bouncing back and forth between different products in UHC, ensuring that that experience is consistent across all of those. You know it's coming from the same brand. You know where to look for certain pieces of information. You know where the logo's going to take you, so it's really giving your subscriber the power to act in the way that you want them to. The next is the big one. How do we then actually take all of that data and tie it to this design system and this playbook that we've just created? And I think what's great is that what you're going to see here is this is going to be different for everyone. There's really no one way to do it, and the way that you all are doing it is incredibly different.
Yeah, so at United Healthcare, we start with, it's called a build of materials. We also refer to it as a BOM. We love our acronyms at UHC, so I'm pretty sure it's another language. So for us, we start with a PSC, or our prospect source code, in our BOM, and that really is, think of it more as like a segment that's going to determine who gets what. And from there, we start to build out the different data fields. And every version is going to have very similar data fields. They're just going to be different based on what we either know or don't know about the prospect. And so then we take this, the coders actually take that, and then really bring it to life in the actual email. So you can kind of see how they align the data with the actual design. Everything kind of outlined is really that personalization. So you can see, plans in Hennepin County. Don't know if we have any other Minnesotans in the room, but that is the Minnesota County, as well as very detailed plan benefits. So for us, we start with that BOM, and that really is the foundation for building the email. We can have a couple of BOMs. It just depends on where the data is coming from and how we want to tie it all together.
Yeah, so with the logic matrix that we showed before, we're pulling all of these different pieces. Like basically you can see on the image that like each color represents a different tile. So like the gray, it goes gray, white, gray, white. So each one of those colors is a different content block in our email. And so then we'll build multiple different variations around that. So we're testing, like I gave the life cycle, this will show the life cycle pieces. So one content block, for example, will have maybe 5 different versions that we're putting in there. So we'll start with a hypothesis. We'll say, hey, we actually think that we should build different variations because we have this particular hypothesis. So then we'll put it in there, we'll test it out. We may not always need it. So this one, for example, is one that we're taking a close look at right now to say, hey, do we actually need to personalize that much? We may not. And so what we want to keep ourselves from doing is personalization for personalization's sake. So it is a lot of work on the team. So we do want to make sure that it is really worth it and actually helping the business in some positive way. So I think one of the things that we're going to look at is certain KPIs around like click-through rate and just general engagement metrics. But I think what we're trying to get to now is more of, I think David was talking about it in the last session, around true attribution and what is this actually doing for the business? Because if we can't tell a strong story there, then it may not be worth putting in an email.
I think that's important, that there is sort of that tipping point where you have your level of effort and your ROI, and is that return so tiny and incremental that it's not worth all of the effort that goes in at the upfront? So yeah, keeping yourself honest on what you actually need. And even when you get to this point, you have this really complex matrix, but it works and everyone uses it. It's not set it and forget it, right? You have to consistently revisit this and make sure that it is still working for your program and your audience as your audience changes over time.
So ours looks a little different, a little more old school, where we started with just sketching it on the far side there, just kind of defining all the different business logic we're interested in, what we would ideally have the email look like, and then we hand it off to a design team, and then ultimately partner with a technology partner to help us actually make the final product. So this email is an example of actually a newer email for us as a play to re-engage those renters I mentioned before who are only on the site for a really short amount of time. But this would be a monthly email to kind of, if they did view that search they had saved, to re-engage them. So you looked at these apartments, here's some other ones you might be interested in nearby. and keeps them going that way. But then partnering with Movable Ink, in our case, it really allowed us to test out those different content blocks. So we can not only test them, but then also help us measure them and know, is it truly, are we spending our time in the right places using these different modules? Are we showing the right number? And kind of helping us narrow down to eventually get to a matrix, hopefully as complex as Chick-fil-A's. But for now, it's working well for us, and we're excited to see the results.
Yeah,
I think there's
our
probably
our days of reviewing the full template are gone. It's a different world of just reviewing different content blocks, and then looking at that compared to the matrix to make sure that we're clear on, okay, well, where is it going and who is the specific audience? So I do kind of miss the days of just being able to look at the template, but also trusting the process and the systems that we have in place that it will come together in the right way.
Yeah, and that's good to note, because I think especially when you look at the Chick-fil-A matrix and you consider how many different versions there are, 600-700 versions of a single email, but you're not creating 600 or 700 pieces of content. Using that design system, you're creating 25 content modules, and then they rearrange themselves in a way that gives you all of those versions. So yeah, you're only really creating and QAing a much smaller number.
I think another good piece to mention too that helps ease some of the stress, I think, on our side is we're not recreating every content block every time. A lot of them, like the life cycle ones that we showed before, those we've created those and we'll plug them in a lot of our emails. So it's not recreating every different piece of content, a different content block every single time.
And I love that you guys use the technology partner, because I think back in one of the early steps, when you talk about how many resources is this going to take to get something like this off the ground, and if the answer is we don't have them, it doesn't have to be, well, then we can't do this. You find a partner who can help you.
That's a great point.
Especially if you have your data in order. If you follow the first 5 steps and you have all your data, it should be really easy for you to find someone to help you execute.
Yeah, and then you can execute much quicker than we could internally.
Yep.
And then this is an example here of back to that massive search form, but just building that trust and building that relationship with the customer to show them, like, you won't look for all these things, here are some alerts or apartments that match your search criteria. Just making good on that promise and delivering that personalized content to them.
Yeah, it's managing those expectations. They ask for this data, but then they're actually bringing it to life in a way that's really impactful and meaningful for the end subscriber. So the next step is prove it. This is probably the most complicated step, and I don't know that any of us on stage can tell you the best way to do this. There's so many variables, the platforms that you're using, your email service provider, or your technology partner like Movable Ink, but figuring out how are we going to test this, and how are we going to pull automated channel metrics out of our platform? Can we even do that? Is it just going to tell me that the click-through rate on Module B was 7%, but I need to know at the audience level who was clicking through and what was happening when they got to the website? So remember this? I'm sure you do.
Yeah, so I think our team does a great job in the upfront, right? That logic matrix is the source of truth for us, the North Star. So we've clarified in the upfront of exactly what we're going after. So then in the reporting over time has gotten much more robust than where it was even 3 years ago. So we are looking at each of those content blocks to understand how did it perform. I also think, as we were talking about this earlier, I think it kind of dawned on me that it's required our team that is in the day-to-day to get even better, though, at understanding, well, what is the bigger story that we're trying to tell? Because we understand this. Anybody who's in the day-to-day of email and who's set up that logic matrix, this makes sense, but it has gotten harder to tell the bigger story to senior level C-suite. So it's required on us to really say, okay, well, we know all these different things about the different content blocks in this email, but if I could only tell 1 story or 3 stories from this email, what is it? So I think we're really in the process of strengthening that muscle on our end. But like I mentioned before, we're also trying to tell more of an attribution story. So these are great, like certain KPIs like click-through rate or engagement rate, like those are fantastic indicators of how engaging an email was. But think what we're on a journey to do is tell maybe a more robust story than that of what is this actually doing for the business.
And for us, I think this kind of brings back the importance of partnerships. Partnering with the data team, the analytics team, to kind of help you pull out those high-level insights is really important. Or be it even partnering with a vendor. A movable ink also helps us measure some of the key content blocks. So just keeping those relationships strong and knowing it doesn't just have to all be a part of on your team.
I think because this is so different, we can't give you a how-to guide for how to do it, but there are some things that you can do to set yourself up for success in being able to measure the effectiveness of this highly personalized program. One is, I think we've said this a few times, outlining those goals and those KPIs before you launch. And we used to just do that at the campaign level, like an offer email, we want to drive sales, or a newsletter, we want to drive engagement. Now we have to do that at the module level. So for the one we were showing with the mobile ordering, each module has a separate KPI. For one, it might be a first order or a repeat order, or maybe it is just awareness. They don't even know that they can do mobile ordering. So having that set at the module level is going to be critical to knowing if this thing worked. Second is having that standardized naming convention and a tagging structure in place. So when you think about the number of modules in an email, even if you can track them all the way through the website, knowing which module it was at a glance. Do your reporting team, your analytics team a favor, work with them on this, create that tagging structure and use it in every email. I think it's also good here too with a partnership. If you have a separate team doing your website analytics, teaming up with them, maybe they already have something in place and you can marry them together. Making sure those site analytics are enabled. To your point, it's not just about engagement anymore. We really need to be able to follow them all the way through the attribution funnel. And having that test plan in advance, or making sure that you don't just set it and forget it and you're coming back and looking at it and saying, is it worth it? You know, how do we know if it was successful or not? And last but not least, iterate, right? Start small. And I think, you know, you see what these programs are doing and it's like, wow, it would take us forever to get there. And it probably will, and it took them forever to get there too. So if right now it is only one attribute and one dynamic module in a campaign, that's okay, because you have to start somewhere. I think the evolution of the Chick-fil-A logic matrix really tells that story. As you learn more about how people are engaging and what content works, this is going to continue to grow. And getting it right means you have to do that now at that modular level. So for every audience, we have to get it right at the right time in the right channel. And this is your plan. So now you can go and, you know, create a completely one-to-one personalized experience in your email program. Questions? Okay, we'll be around. So if you have questions, come find us.